They smirked in the courtroom, certain their corruption would go unpunished, until a woman stood, her voice cutting through their celebration, revealing she was the FBI director, and their world unraveled in an instant. Her name was Dr. Adrienne Walker, a 47-year-old black woman who had risen through the ranks of the FBI to become its director, appointed in 2023 as the first woman and first black person to hold the position. With a PhD in criminal justice and over 2 decades of experience in law enforcement, Adrienne was known for her sharp intellect, unyielding integrity, and a relentless commitment to rooting out corruption. In the spring of 2025, she found herself in a small courtroom in Birmingham, Alabama, facing a case that would expose a web of corruption and send shockwaves through the city's police department. The case centered on officers Brian Keller and Matthew Tate, 2 white Birmingham police officers accused of falsifying evidence, extorting money from local businesses, and brutalizing suspects in a predominantly black neighborhood. The allegations had surfaced a year earlier when a whistleblower, a young officer named Jamal Carter, provided internal documents to the FBI. The evidence was damning: body camera footage showing excessive force, bank records linking the officers to illicit payments, and witness statements from shop owners coerced into paying for protection. But Keller and Tate were confident, backed by a network of colleagues and a defense attorney known for getting cops acquitted. On the day of the trial's closing arguments, the courtroom was tense. Keller and Tate sat at the defense table, their expressions smug as their attorney, Richard Conway, delivered a polished argument casting doubt on the evidence. He painted the officers as dedicated public servants, victims of a witch hunt, driven by a disgruntled rookie and an overzealous federal agency. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Lisa Nguyen, presented a meticulous case, but the officers' confidence never wavered. They whispered to each other, smirking as Conway wrapped up, certain the jury would side with them. Adrienne sat in the back of the courtroom, dressed in a navy suit, her presence unassuming. She had flown in from Washington, D.C. the night before, choosing to observe the trial quietly rather than announce her involvement. Only a few people knew she was there: Nguyen, who had briefed her on the case, and a handful of FBI agents who had worked the investigation under her direction. Adrienne's team had spent months building the case, coordinating with local activists and whistleblowers to uncover the full scope of the officers' corruption. She wanted to see the trial's outcome firsthand, not just as director, but as someone who had dedicated her life to justice. As the jury deliberated, Keller and Tate chatted with their attorney, their voices low but their confidence palpable. They believed they had won. Conway had sown enough doubt, and the Birmingham Police Union had rallied behind them, framing the case as an attack on law enforcement. The courtroom buzzed with their supporters, including fellow officers who nodded approvingly from the gallery. The mood shifted, however, when the jury returned after just 3 hours. The foreman stood, his face unreadable. "On the charge of evidence tampering, we find the defendants not guilty," he said. A murmur of approval rippled through the officers' supporters. Keller and Tate exchanged a glance, their smiles widening. The foreman continued, "On the charge of extortion, not guilty." The courtroom erupted in quiet cheers from the defense side. Conway clapped Keller on the shoulder, whispering something that made both officers grin. But the foreman wasn't done. "On the charge of civil rights violations under color of law, we find the defendants guilty." The words hit like a gavel, silencing the room. Keller's smile vanished, and Tate's face paled. Conway leaned forward, his confidence shaken, as the foreman detailed additional guilty verdicts for excessive force and obstruction of justice. The jury had seen through the defense's tactics, swayed by the overwhelming evidence of body camera footage, financial records, and witness testimonies. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Margaret Ellison, set sentencing for 6 weeks later, warning that the penalties would be severe. As the courtroom began to clear, Keller and Tate were led away in handcuffs, their earlier bravado replaced by stunned silence. Their supporters lingered, muttering about appeals and unfair treatment, but the tide had turned. Adrienne watched it all, her expression calm, but her mind racing. The verdicts were a victory, but she knew the case was bigger than 2 officers. It was about a system that had allowed their corruption to thrive for years. As the gallery emptied, a group of officers' supporters gathered outside, their voices loud with indignation. One of them, a retired cop named Frank Dutton, spotted Adrian standing near the courthouse steps, speaking quietly with Nguyen. Dutton, emboldened by the crowd, approached her, his face red with anger. "You people think you can ruin good cops' lives?" he said, his voice carrying. "This is a disgrace. Who do you think you are, coming in here and stirring up trouble?" Adrian turned to face him, her gaze steady. The crowd quieted, sensing the shift in the air. Nguyen stepped back, knowing what was coming. Adrian's voice was calm, deliberate, but it carried the weight of authority. "I'm Adrian Walker," she said, "Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And I'm here to ensure justice is served, not just for those officers, but for the community they betrayed." The crowd froze. Dutton's mouth opened, but no words came out. The other supporters exchanged glances, their anger deflating as they processed her words. The FBI director, here in their small courtroom, watching their every move. Adrian didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. Her title, her presence, her unapologetic clarity said it all. She had overseen the investigation, approved the resources, and ensured the case was airtight. This wasn't just a local matter. It was a federal reckoning. Dutton stammered, trying to regain his footing. "I didn't mean, look, we just want fair treatment for our guys," he said, his tone weaker now. Adrienne's eyes didn't waver. "Fair treatment starts with accountability," she said. "Those officers abused their power, targeted innocent people, and undermined the trust of this community. That's not what law enforcement stands for. If you want to defend them, you're defending corruption." The crowd dispersed, some quietly, others muttering under their breath. Adrian turned back to Nguyen, resuming their conversation as if the interruption hadn't happened. But the moment lingered, spreading through the community like wildfire. By evening, local news outlets were reporting on the trial's outcome and Adrienne's presence in the courtroom. Social media erupted, with clips of her confrontation with Dutton going viral under hashtags like #JusticeInBirmingham and #FBI Director Speaks. The image of a black woman, the head of the FBI, standing up to a crowd of angry cop supporters became a symbol of accountability and strength. The case didn't end with the verdicts. Adrienne's team continued investigating, uncovering ties between Keller, Tate, and a broader network of officers involved in similar schemes. The Birmingham Police Department faced intense scrutiny, with the mayor announcing an independent review of its practices. Adrienne herself met with community leaders, listening to their stories of harassment and fear. She didn't promise miracles, but she pledged resources, more federal oversight, training programs, and support for whistleblowers like Jamal Carter. Jamal, the young officer who had blown the whistle, faced his own challenges. Some colleagues shunned him, calling him a traitor, but others quietly thanked him for his courage. Adrienne personally called him, offering her support and ensuring his career wouldn't suffer for doing the right thing. "You're the kind of officer we need," she told him. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." In the weeks that followed, Keller and Tate were sentenced to 7 years each in federal prison, a rare outcome for police misconduct cases. The judge cited the overwhelming evidence and the need to send a message. No one was above the law. Adrienne didn't attend the sentencing. She was back in D.C., overseeing other cases, but she read the reports with quiet satisfaction. The Birmingham case had set a precedent, showing that even the most entrenched corruption could be dismantled with persistence and evidence. Adrienne continued her work as director, navigating the complexities of leading an agency with a fraught history. She pushed for reforms from diversity initiatives to stricter oversight of local law enforcement partnerships. Her presence in Birmingham had been a turning point, not just for the city, but for her own mission. She had seen too many communities suffer, too many lives upended by those sworn to protect them. And as a black woman, she knew the stakes were personal. The story of the Birmingham trial spread, inspiring other whistleblowers and activists. Community groups organized, demanding transparency and accountability. Adrienne's name became synonymous with justice, her face a fixture in discussions about reforming law enforcement. She didn't seek the spotlight, but she didn't shy away from it either. "This is about trust," she said in a rare interview. "Not just in the FBI, but in the idea that no one, badge or no badge, gets to escape accountability." For the people of Birmingham, Adrienne's involvement was a reminder that change was possible, even in the face of entrenched power. For Keller and Tate, it was a lesson in consequences. And for Adrienne, it was another day in a career defined by breaking barriers and holding the line. She carried on, her resolve unshaken, knowing the work was far from done but determined to see it through.